Today in Java, we're going to talk about loops. So I just have a little sample project started up here, and I'm going to do some demonstrations. And the first one is, let's do a countdown. So how would I make a countdown happen? I could do this. I could say, countdown. And then I could print 10. Actually, I don't have to do that with quotes. I can just do numbers there. And then I could do it again. And we've already talked about a principle here that I'm violating. And I can make this one a 9. One an 8. And honestly, I don't want to type these all the way down to 1. I'll just give you a little demonstration. We'll run it. And it prints countdown 10, 9, 8. And theoretically, after I print 7 other statements in here, we get to 0 and then a blast off. Right? But that's very repetitive. It's repetitive. And then what if I decided to change my countdown to 100? Now I have to go in and add 90 more lines. We don't want to do that. It's very inefficient. We're repeating almost identical code everywhere. Some people say, well, how about if I add a variable in there and I could make this a variable? But then we'd still have to have in between, we'd have to be decreasing the variable at every step. Okay, so I could say, I could start out with number equals 10. I have to make that an int. And I could put number here, right? And then I could just copy that. And then in between each one, I could say number minus. And again, that's going to get repetitive. The whole idea that I can copy and paste a bunch of things should tell me, there might be a better way. So if I run this, I get 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, right? But again, if I decided to make it 100 times, then I'm going to have 100. Well, in this case, now 200 statements. So how could we do it? This idea of using a variable isn't a terrible idea. But having to repeat this and repeat that 100 times to make it happen is not a good idea. So we're going to use something called a loop. We're going to start off today with something called a for loop. So rather than do this way, I'm going to show you a for loop. So we start out with the word for. And then we have some parentheses. Underneath it, there's going to be a block of code. I've told you before that I like for new programmers, it helps to get your structure in place first. And then inside the for, it's going to take 3 things separated by semicolons. Okay. So a for, our 3 items will be separated by the 2 semicolons there, and I'll tell you what those are in a minute. And then a block of code that's going to repeat. So what are the things that the 3 things we have to supply to this for loop? Well, for loops are good at counting. So the first thing we need is a variable we're going to initialize to count. We used number. That was a very descriptive name for a variable. Not that descriptive because it's kind of a general display here, but we use this. I've told you, use descriptive names for your variables. Use descriptive names for your variables. For loops are the one place where we usually get away, and it's generally accepted to use a single letter variable. And more often than not, people use an I. So we'll say I is an int. So we say int I equals 0. This is initializing our variable. Okay. We're creating a variable called I that's starting out with a value of 0. So that is the first step. I'm going to put a little, see if I can do a little code up here. Initialization, right? And I'm going to put it right above there. Then what's the second thing we have to have? Okay. The next thing we have to have is a condition. Actually, let's start I at 10 because we're doing the countdown still. So we want to start at 10. What's the condition? Well, we want to count as long as I is greater than or equal to 0. Okay. So this is a condition just like we would use in an if statement. We're going to test this condition. Every time this block of code runs, we're going to test this condition again to see if the number we initialized is still greater than or equal to 0. So is I greater than or equal to 0? And if it is, this block of code will run again. Okay, so that is the condition. And then the last one is the update expression. I want to abbreviate that. We'll put update here. How are we going to update that variable I? And in this case, we start at 10 and we want to go to 0. So we're subtracting 1 each time. We can say I minus minus. So this is how we're going to start our variable. This is how we're going to update it each time this block of code runs. So we're going to start at 10 and every time we're going to subtract 1. And remember, I could write this I equals I minus 1. I could say I plus, or excuse me, minus equals 1. I minus equal 1. But this is what usually we're counting. In a for loop, we're usually counting up or down by 1 95% of the time. So we usually use I plus plus, I minus minus. You see it a lot. Now, inside our loop body, we can use this variable I for whatever we want to use it for. In this case, we're doing a countdown. So really, all we're doing is printing it out. Okay, and it's a number, so I don't need quotes around it. So I'll just put I here. That's it. That's it. So I is going to start at 10. We're going to print I. Then we're going to subtract 1 from I and check, is I greater than or equal to 0? Since we started at 10, it's going to print 10. It's going to subtract 1 and get 9. Is 9 greater than 0? Yes, so it's going to run the body of our loop again. It's going to subtract 1, compare it to the condition, and it's going to keep doing that until this condition becomes false. Okay. As long as this condition is true, the body of this loop between the two curly braces will keep executing. Let's do that. There we go. We started out with our statement here that said countdown. Okay. Then we ran through our loop. I started as 10. And we stopped it when it was greater than or equal to 0. In this case, equal to 0. Remember, the last time through this was equal to 0. What happened? It subtracted 1 from I again, and it became -1. And since -1 is not greater than or equal to 0, the loop ended. And then it should run the code that comes after it. Let's put some code after it. And we'll put in here blast off. Okay, so we got countdown. Then this loop that should run, in this case, 11 times since we went all the way to 0 from 10. And then blast off. Run it. Countdown. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Blast off. Okay, once the loop was done, it ran the code that comes after it. So it's a control structure. It changed the order that our code executed. We started here, we go line by line, but when we get to here, the control structure makes this line repeat until the condition is no longer true. I'll show you more in the next video.